Welcome to the Smart Thinking Podcast. This is my dad, Ted.
Welcome to the Smart Thinking Podcast. I'm your host, Ted Knightsky. What if I were to be able to provide you a playbook that gave you all the tools you needed in order to support the leadership and lives of those that you serve? What if I were to find for you a comprehensive list of 50 different strategies you could employ at any given moment to lift up both the spirits and the purpose of the people around you? What if I were to find the author of that book and have a conversation with her in order to position each of us to be able to demonstrate our leadership every single day and elevate the world around us? Well, lucky for you, I did. Her name is Amy Morin, and she wrote the book, The Mental Strength Playbook. It's one of several books that she has authored, but what I'm going to share with you today is our conversation around this most recent text of hers, because I think that you, as an individual, no matter what you do in this world, will find this book fantastic. It's a book that you can go to, you can just read a little bit of, you can go in there and use it as an index of just different strategies and approaches to take to supporting other people while you're coaching them or living with them or raising them. Teaching them, growing them, or supporting them. It doesn't matter. This is a fantastic book, and this is a great conversation. So, get ready to get out a notepad and take some awesome notes about the strategies and tactics you can employ starting today to support the well-being of others. Welcome to the Smart Thinking Podcast. I have a great guest today, multiple-time author, and somebody who is going to give us a tremendous amount of strategies to help us be better leaders, first for ourselves and others. The current book she has out is The Mental Strength Playbook, and the author is Amy Morin. And Amy, I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So first of all, because this is audio, no one else can see what I can see, where am I interviewing you from today?
So I am on a sailboat in the Florida Keys, which happens to be where I live and also where I work.
Yeah, fantastic. Address is Pier 8 or something like that, I'm guessing.
It absolutely is, yep.
So, Amy, I mean, we're going to get into all of your books and just the different ways that you have positively influenced other people to do things and focus on themselves and bettering themselves. But tell me, let's start from the beginning for our listeners. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a little town called Dexter, Maine. We were known for Dexter Shoe, and we had the factory that made the shoes. But my father worked for the post office after he retired from the military. I had been born in Scotland only because he was stationed there. And so I grew up with my parents and my sister in rural Maine. Absolutely had a lovely, beautiful childhood where we played outdoors and thankfully didn't have things like social media.
Yeah. So how long did you live in Scotland?
Only for the first couple years of my life. So I was born there and we lived there until I was about 2.
So not long enough to have experienced haggis, Scotch eggs.
Correct. And so I just went back to Scotland in January of this year. I hadn't been back since I was 2 and found my old house that we lived in when I was born. It was a kind of a surreal experience.
Very, very cool. And in Maine, are you on the coast? Are you in the center? Are you in the woods? Where are you?
Yeah, so I'm in the center. It's a very rural, wooded area, and we went to the coast like once a year, like a lot of families who live in rural Maine, and just had a kind of an idyllic kind of a childhood where we just spent a lot of time riding ATVs and snowmobiling and all of those sorts of outdoor things.
Oh, fantastic! Noah Kahn type of parts of Maine, right? Stick
Right.
season.
Yes, exactly.
So tell me about going to school then. Did you go to obviously a rural elementary, middle school, high school? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so it was very rural, and my mother had grown up in the town that I lived in, and so she had gone to the same school. It was built in like the 50s, and small. I think my high school was like 400 students total. And I despised school, every aspect of school. I threw up every day until about the fourth grade. Yeah. I was an incredibly shy kid. And every teacher would write on my report card that I was painfully shy, which of course made me speak even less. And even though I had good grades, nothing really difficult. I didn't get picked on or anything like that. And even as an adult, I can't really pinpoint what I hated about school. But as a kid, everybody would ask me, like, why do you hate school so much? And all I could say was, it's a really long day. And I felt like school, like the school day was like 4 years long. And again, I had good grades. My teachers were amazing. It just felt like a school day was so long and boring that I really struggled with it. And I had a lot of anxiety. I had separation anxiety from my mom. She was a stay-at-home mom until about the fourth grade. And I was just so shy. The fact that I might get called on and have to read something in front of the class was really difficult for me.
I have a lot of empathy for that. My daughter Grace is has a similar story to that, where pretty much through third grade, fourth grade, she went to school every day. She was quiet. Kindergarten, she only talked to the classroom aide, and that kind of severe introvert was what that's difficult to coach through as a parent and a friend. And then obviously over time she grew into that. But I remember we're going to parent teacher conferences, and like the woman who worked in the cafeteria, the lunch lady, came up and said, your daughter has never once said anything. She just points. And now I can tell that's not an issue for you, and neither is it for Gracie. But I think that's an interesting formative piece, because for her, at least what I've seen, it'll be interesting to see how you respond to this. She is very hypersensitive to other people. She's very empathetic. And I think that early formative stage for her, and maybe you, was spending a lot of time just observing everything, worrying about what could possibly happen.
Yeah, and that was definitely me as a small child. I had friends who were amazing and my sister, and they would all speak for me. So I didn't have to, which of course I loved at the time, but that made it a lot worse. And yeah, I observed people a lot. And again, the more people would point out, oh, you never talk. Or they would tell my parents, like, oh, she never speaks. And then my parents would be like, she talks all the time at home.
Yeah.
But
And are
just
you the
hearing,
second child?
I am, yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm sorry.
And, so I think just the more that like people paid attention to the fact that I didn't talk, the more difficult it became to then suddenly be the person who starts speaking. And because of so many great friends who are still my best friends to this day would step in and accommodate me so that I didn't have to speak, the easier it got to not have to talk at all.
Yeah, I have a funny sidebar about this. So I'm the oldest of three brothers. That's why I asked you your birth order question. And my youngest brother, John, had a speech impediment and was delayed in speaking. And so I was 6 when he was born. My brother Tom was 3. So by the time he's 2, I'm 8. Tommy is 5. And somebody came to the house to observe the interaction of my brother John with us. And the first sentence in the report is, his speech will continue to be delayed if his brothers never let him speak.
Right?
And then we were like sat down and we were like, you have to let John talk. And we were like, but what? He's got nothing to say. He never talks. It's like, because he can't. So it's fantastic.
Interesting. Yeah, that's quite fascinating, isn't it?
So then middle school, high school, same school building, or were you big enough community where you had multiple schools? What was that like?
Yeah, we had the elementary school and middle school, junior high was all one building. High school was just down the street. So very easy to go to. I was like a mile and a half away, so I could take the bus to school. And it was in fairly good disrepair. Again, like a lot of the same teachers that my mother had. They then had my mother, they had my sister, and then they had me. So I'd often get called by my mother's name or my sister's name.
Oh. Yeah.
Which is funny, but my family, my uncles had all gone to this school and the small community as well. I had cousins, that sort of a thing. So it was interesting.
Yeah. And in that time period between middle school, high school, elementary school, were there any teachers that were really impactful for you that you recall as you move on and, go to where you are today?
I had a second grade teacher who was incredibly kind, and she really didn't pay attention to a lot of the stuff about like Amy shy. She would really focus on, wow, you memorized all your math facts. And so it made me like second grade a lot more than I had liked the other grades. And then, funnily enough, I just posted like 2 weeks ago about my new book on social media. And my second grade teacher came onto Facebook and said, "I'm so proud of
Oh,
you."
oh.
And I thought, all of these years later, I have a different last name than I did back then. And she still follows me on social media. And I think, how incredible is that?
Well, what's her name?
Mrs. Dow was her name when I've had her. She's been remarried now, so her name is Mrs. Terrio these
So
days.
here's what I can tell you, Amy, from a teacher and a principal and a superintendent of schools. We all live vicariously through our students. And there you don't forget any of your students. There are just some students that burn into your brain. And then when you
Yeah.
see them thriving, it'll be interesting to hear her perspective of you, little second grade Amy, because I'm sure it's very different than your perspective of yourself. And
Right.
when you were saying, why you like second grade, she was clearly doing the greatest strategy we can do for our own mental health is positive reinforcement. Like, what is
Right.
going well? That's fantastic. So after high school, where do you end up going?
So I went to undergrad school at the University of Maine, which is in Orono, Maine, about an hour from where I grew up. My sister had gone there for her bachelor's and decided to go there for my undergrad. Got my degree in social work, and I then went on to grad school. Funnily enough, I had applied to the University of Maine for graduate school. I did not get in. I thought I was kind of a slam dunk because I went there for undergrad. Got denied for grad school. So I ended up going to the University of New England for grad school. But all of these years later, I discover that the University of Maine now has my book on their recommended reading list for their incoming
Oh,
students. So the same school that didn't let me in. And in fact, they just gave me an alumni award for the like most outstanding alumni from my graduating class. So in the end, I think, oh, that's kind of cool. Even though that one rejection, I think at the time really stung, ultimately, they put my book on their recommended reading list, which was the ultimate
that
compliment.
that's a great compliment. When you went for that, when you go back to the university, you don't bring that rejection letter with you, do you?
Funnily enough, I didn't have a copy of it because I threw it out. I reached out to them within the past couple of months and asked them, "Hey, do you guys still have a copy of that?" And they sent it to me, so I do have it.
Oh, that is fantastic. Yeah, put that on. That's just motivation, right? So,
Exactly, exactly.
so then career-wise, where do you go after grad school?
So I was working at a community mental health center in rural Maine as well, and became a therapist. So I started seeing mostly children and teenagers at my first job, and had a lot of kids that either had behavior problems. We had a specialized school in the building where I worked, so kids who were expelled from school would come to get their education there, and worked with a lot of teens with depression, anxiety, all the things you would expect teenagers were struggling with at the time.
And getting into where your texts get rooted in. Talk to me about the time period. What years is this that you're doing that?
So I started as a therapist in 2001.
Okay. And what themes were you seeing then through, young people that you were working with and supporting?
It was a lot of depression and anxiety, a lot of kids who were struggling with going to school, a lot of social phobia, a lot of kids with school refusal, and some self-harm, and again, a fair amount of behavior problems, defiance, and parents who were concerned about their kids' just behavior overall.
And when you were in that position, this is kind of the onset or early parts of social media. Were,
Right.
were you starting to see some of the harm that was coming from there? And what advice did you give kids and parents?
So, back then it was like a lot of kids were starting with like blogs, and there
Yeah.
was a couple of, social media apps where it was more like you were then writing a blog as opposed to posting it on Instagram or TikTok. And a lot of parents were saying, well, I don't allow my kids to do that. I don't want them to do that kind of a thing. But almost all the kids were coming in, of course, figuring out how to do it in a way that mom and dad just didn't know that they were doing it. And so a lot of our conversations were about, rather than tell your kids, hey, you can't do these things, why don't we talk about the dangers of doing it or the
Hmm.
risks? Or if you're going to give them full reign of the internet, what to do to if you make a mistake or if an adult reaches out to you with inappropriate material, what are you going to do? Instead of telling kids not to, because I had so many kids that would come in and say, my parents told me not to give out my address online in some chat room or something, and I just did. And now I don't know what to do about it. Or I was talking to this person, I thought he was my age, turns out he's 35. Now what do I do? And a lot of parents had no idea what their kids were doing. They would all come in and say, my kid would never do that. And of course, teenagers will be teens.
Well, that's the reason I asked, because when you were in that season of life, I was a middle school principal, and a fairly large middle school, 1,000 students. And I just watched this rapid evolution from online communities, things like MySpace and,
Yeah.
remember Napster and all of these different things that were happening. But then I just watched these different platforms that created opportunities for people to increase their own self-doubt. And it really bothered me. And as a middle school principal, I just watched how technology and access to it started out almost, it was prohibitive. It was hard. Like if you had a phone, it cost money every time you texted. So your parents didn't let you text. And then all of a sudden, when it just all opened up, it was nuts. And the only reason I even got on Facebook was because we were beginning to enjoy so many problems with it, between not just the students, but their own families, where they would blast a kid on there.
Right.
What advice did you give then when those types of things started to evolve?
Yeah, one of the big things we were seeing was like parents trying to shame their kids into behaving better. And
Yeah.
when it came to social media, where they would, have their kid like posting about their kid, guess what he did today? And I think back then, like we didn't realize like the extent of making something public on the internet, right? Even as adults, we didn't really realize I'm not just posting a photo of my child, I'm posting something that is going to live forever in the internet, could get passed around, turned into a meme, who knows, or affect their future job prospects or their future relationships when I'm posting this stuff. And so I think a lot of it was just trying to wrap our heads around like, what does that mean? You're not just posting this for your relatives on Facebook, but you're putting this out there into the universe. And if you want your children to behave better, certainly shaming them isn't going to help them. But also then for, as you say, for younger people who are then, we went from like wanting our stuff to be private and nobody knowing to suddenly getting reinforced by getting likes and putting embarrassing things out there in hopes that a lot of people would see it. And that happened really fast. It felt like it did anyway, that we wanted all of our private information to now become public, and juggling that. How do you handle that, whether you get rejected socially or you think that putting this out there will help you somehow, or somebody else says something embarrassing about you? So many things that we were trying to figure out all in real time. There was no guidebook of how do you do this or how do you manage that.
So as you're working with young people, tell me, like, having been a trained classroom teacher, I don't think I was in the classroom for more than 6 hours by myself when I began to become impressed with just like what they were capable of, who they were. Everybody grows up different, and I kind of grew up with a little bit of, well, not a little bit, with some trauma, some inconsistencies, some weirdness. And then I would run into these amazing people, even young people who were struggling, were way more resilient than I think I had thought capable. Before we get into all the different ways to get better, like what were some things that just kind of blew your mind when you were working with them?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I would meet these kids who had been through so much. So, like, parents are in jail, or kids that were in foster care, kids that had moved 17 times, and they were still like respectful, nice kids, or they were hopeful. Or even the kids who were kind of naughty or defiant. Sometimes I really like those kids too, because I think like you still have some spark in you. You didn't give up. And it might be that you were mistreated by the system, kids that had been in 14 different foster homes, and yet they were so kind of defiant. And I would be like secretly cheering them on, because rather than just resigning themselves to become Eeyore and say, this is what happens to you in life, like they were still fighting back, saying like, this isn't okay. And and you're right. So many of these kids had been through things, but yet here they were, and they were still showing up every day. And some of them were just incredibly kind too. And it had inspired me over the years. I became a therapeutic foster parent myself just because I thought the system has wronged a lot of these kids and I want to be part of the solution and not more of the problem. I want to make sure that I'm out there doing something that hopefully makes kids' lives better in a different way too, rather than just in the therapy office.
Well, okay, so there's a whole new door I didn't think we would talk about.
Uh,
Tell me about fostering. What a
so,
great mission.
it was shortly after I graduated from grad school. So it was probably 2003-ish that decided to more into foster care. I'd gotten married, and my husband and I at the time decided to start exploring what that would mean, do the home study, the whole 9 yards. And because I was a therapist, they wanted to give me the naughty kids, which I was fine with. So I became a therapeutic foster parent. And every kid we had was a kid who the state had decided they weren't sure if the kid was adoptable for one reason or another. And they were all at like a turning point. Like I was the last stop. And if they deemed them unadoptable, then they just go to a group home where they eventually age out of the system. They turn 18 and then they don't have a family. And to me, that is like the saddest thing. If
Yeah.
you are 18, like what kind of chances do you have in life if you turn 18 and you don't have a parent or a family member that you can call when you need something? And so that was my mission, was to take the kids who had been kicked out of most of their other placements and see if we could turn them around so that they could be adopted. And I'm proud to say every kid who went through our house was able to either be placed with a family member or placed up for adoption when they left. And and to me that was the biggest thing. And so many of them just been put in placements that weren't a good match, or they'd been placed with relatives who just were ill prepared. They didn't know, how do you raise a child who's been through all this trauma? And none of them were bad kids. They just needed some structure, some rules, some positive reinforcement, and then some healthy consequences and some teaching when things went sideways.
So I love the phrase ill prepared, the parents who are ill prepared or people who are ill prepared, because that takes us to your just wealth of published strategies and ideas. So 13 things mentally strong people don't do, leading into multiple texts around that. And what I have to tell you is my favorite part of your book series, with the exception of your kids' book, because that's it. That's the in the affirmative do. I love the don't do's. How did you get to that?
Um, so, the story behind the first book was it was a letter to myself on one of my worst days. My husband had passed away when we were both 26. And it fell on the 3-year anniversary of the day that my mom died. My mom died when I was 23. And on one of the worst days of my life, I wrote myself a letter about what mentally strong people don't do. Because I thought, when I feel like I'm at the bottom of the barrel, the last thing I need is a list of what to do. Go for a
Right.
walk, eat healthy food, do all of these things. And I thought, I can't. But if you tell me not to feel sorry for myself, okay, I'll focus on that. And as a therapist, I had learned that so many people would come into my office and they had all of these wonderful habits, like, oh, I practice gratitude and I go to the gym, but I still don't feel good. Why? Well, sometimes it was because they had one or two bad habits that kept them stuck, but they had just focused on what to do. So I knew sometimes you just get rid of your worst habit and all of your good habits suddenly become much more effective. So on my worst day, I write myself a list of what not to do. Never intended on turning it into a book, but published it online. I got paid $15 for the article. And I thought, maybe it'll help somebody else. And then 50 million people read the list. And one of them was a literary agent who said, you should write a book. And that's how the first book came about.
Well, and I love the story too about presenting and the anxiety and just like I think what's powerful for me for your first year text and now the playbook, which we'll talk about in a second, is it's so positive. It's so applicable. And my favorite thing is it's not a step book. It's change any of these things.
Right.
And like where has that taken you?
So, for me, it was important, like in the moment of just don't feel sorry for yourself. That's why that was number one on the list. And once the list took off and I was able to write the book, then so many people have said, "Oh, like I can relate to this." So then I got to do the TEDx talk, and then more people said, "Now that you've talked about what not to do with the People book, how do we raise mentally strong kids?" So that led to the parenting book, and then that led to a women's book, and here we are. It was 2013 that I wrote the list, and I'm still speaking and writing about mental strength to this day.
Which I think is fantastic because there's so many books out there that focus on one thing, positivity or a single strategy. And when we get into your new book, The Mental Strength Playbook, one of the things that I really appreciate about it is that you have 50 strategies. And I just want to start out with my favorite, which is number 2. And I know it's always hard when you are the author of a book and somebody quotes you, but you have a quote right off the bat here that I just want to share with you and hear your response to, because it's on the first page of the first chapter and in part 1. And I stopped reading the book. It's the third paragraph's first sentence. It says, "Your inner dialogue influences your confidence, your performance, and even your enjoyment at work. The good news is you have the power to reframe unconstructive scripts once you have the strategies to do so." How did you get to that spot where you knew the inner dialogue was really what you have to tackle?
So a lot of my work is as a cognitive behavioral therapist. So I know what you think affects how you feel and how you behave. And just taking control of that, knowing that you can't always control the automatic thought that pops into your head, but you can control how you respond to it. And I saw it work well with people, whether they were battling depression or anxiety or just struggling in a relationship. When you figure out how do you manage your thoughts, everything changes. But it also works with little things when you're struggling to send an email because you keep rereading it, or you're a bit of a perfectionist and you can't get a project done. Just saying, "I'm going to change how I think," really changes everything. And I'm not saying that positive thinking is the cure for everything. Like if I sit on the couch and just think positively all day, my life doesn't get any better. I have to put it into action. But sometimes that's what we need to do first, is to say, I at least have to believe that my action is going to be powerful enough that it could create change. Otherwise, I won't take the action. So by tackling our mindsets first, and it often starts with our inner critic, then it feels like we have more control over our lives, and then we take the action that we need to make things better.
What did you name your inner critic?
Mine is called Fretting Phyllis.
Fretting Phyllis. So
Yes.
you talk about the inner critic, because that's my favorite strategy of yours.
So, yeah, I think we all have that inner dialogue that warns us. It doesn't want us to be blindsided. So it'll say like, "Oh, Amy, don't say the wrong thing," or "Make sure this project is good enough before you hand it in." And it makes sense that we have that inner critic because we want to do well and we want to fit in and we want to make sure that we're being socially appropriate, all of those things. But our inner critic is often a little bit too harsh. It puts us down or beats us up, or it's a little bit too cautious sometimes. It's like, don't do that. Somebody might look at you weird, or be careful. And it'll talk us out of doing things too. So it's important to recognize that just because your inner critic tells you you can't do something doesn't mean you have to listen. Maybe you think, is that true or not? But if you always treat that inner voice as fact, then it causes you to live a pretty small life. But if you can talk back to it and think, all right, it's okay. If I have a typo in this email, like nobody's going to judge me harshly. Or if I get up and give this presentation and it doesn't go great, that's okay. The world isn't going to end. But our inner critic will tell us, most of us anyway, like, don't do that. You might embarrass yourself. Or after we've done something, it's like, now you've really done it. You've ruined everything. Again, you don't have to listen to that voice.
Do you have the invert experience? Do you ever have the opposite voice? Do you have the kind of champion, the inner champion voice?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have those moments where my inner critic is like, "Well, you've really messed up this time and there's no recovering." And then I just reminded, like, no, you can rise to the occasion. Like, the bigger the challenge, the bigger the opportunity. So I certainly have the flip side of that as a reminder of, I've done it before, I can do it again.
Yeah, when I first learned this strategy years ago, I named mine Darth Vader. I was like, this is the dark side. This is about as bad as, this is somebody who wants to just cut you down, stop you. And I'll never forget. I think, let's say I learned about it on a Monday. I named that voice that evening, went to bed. And Wednesday night, I woke up and my wife woke me up because I was laying face down, smacking the mattress, screaming at Darth Vader. And she's like, what are you dreaming about? And I said, why, what was I saying? She's like, you're screaming at Darth Vader. And I was like, oh, I must be having an inner dialogue with my critic right now. That's fantastic.
That's a great example.
Yeah. So when you get into the text, which I just want to share with the listeners, what I love about Amy's format is this is a book where you can, and actually, I don't know if you'd recommend this, but I would recommend reading a couple of the strategies and from the playbook and putting it down, walking away and applying them. Because this feels the mental strength playbook for me is like, it's mental fitness. It's making myself better. And one of the ones I want you to tell me about is the visiting your victory vault. First of all, I love the alliteration, but most importantly, like, what is a victory vault and why should we visit it?
Yeah. So if I were to ask you, like, hey, what are the top 20 accomplishments you've had in life? You might have some trouble coming up with those things. Like most of us, I think, can come up with a couple of the big ones. But then when we really stop and think, well, what have I done that's amazing? It's usually a little bit tougher to list those things. However, usually the failures, the rejections, the things that sting the most, those are often a little bit more easily accessible. And then what happens is if I try to do something and I get rejected and I start thinking, oh, I'm not good enough. Suddenly I remember every other time I've been rejected. It activates the part of your brain where you felt that emotion before. So the sting of rejection will remind me of, hey, you didn't get into grad school. Hey, that time that you tried to do something and it didn't work out and that you embarrassed yourself, like all of those things start to pop up into my head. And before I know it, I start to think I'm kind of a loser. Like I can think of 52 times I was rejected and times when I've embarrassed myself. Your victory vault is something that you write down. It's a list on your phone, on a piece of paper, of the times when you've like been able to rise to the occasion. Maybe you beat the odds. Maybe you stayed up and studied for a test that you didn't think you could pass and you passed it back in college. Or you stood up at the third grade spelling bee and you spelled a couple of words right, even though it was scary to do that. And so that when you get rejected, you have this list to read over to remind yourself, okay, even though I just got rejected for this promotion, here are 32 things that I've done well. Like I assure you, my victory vault now includes the fact that grad school that didn't let me in has my book on their recommended reading list, right? That's one of my victories.
Yeah.
So just reading those things reminds me, all right, so what? I got rejected for this thing, but I do have some victories in my vault. So I always encourage everyone to create your victory vault. And when you get rejected or you're filled with self-doubt, just read it as a way to remind you and to balance that out so that you don't just think about all the rejections and the times when things haven't gone well.
I absolutely love that strategy for multiple reasons. The first reason is being a Midwesterner. If somebody ever saw your list of top 20 things that you've accomplished, they'd look at you like there was something wrong with you. Like, who writes down those things? So it's not in the nature of a lot of us to think to ourselves, like, what are those 20 things?
Right.
And I love that strategy because like I went and did it, and when I was done, when I stepped back and I looked at it, it reframed basically the values I've lived my life by. Like I don't have a lot of, I would imagine that living on a boat in the Keys is somewhere on that top 100 of your life. But it's the other things, the micro things that I look past all the time. Like, I've successfully been married I've been with my wife for 30 plus years between dating and marriage, and she's still the love of my life. That was number one.
Yeah.
And I love that you did that for me, Amy. And I love that you're doing it for so many other people. And I want to get your response, or go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I love that you include something like that, the personal victories, because I think sometimes we overlook those. We just think it's about professional, like, okay, I got this award or this achievement. But I think some of our best victories are the other things. Somebody says, I advocated for my mom at her doctor's appointment and got her the treatment that she needed. Like, that's a huge victory in life, right? Not just about getting the plaque at the office for perfect attendance.
Well, that's one of the big pieces for life and the listeners is that in a given day, if you're awake for 12 hours, the amount of things that you do that have positive impact on others far outnumbers the one or two negative moments in your day.
Right.
And one of the things I always tell kids when I work with them, and there's a whole chapter in the book I wrote on this, is you have already overcome your hardest day. Because if you haven't, how could you be here? So stop anticipating when it's coming, because you've already done it.
Right.
And what I like is that your playbook gives us that. So one of the things that I really wanted to talk about too is your play number 12, which is question your question. Tell us about that, because again, it's so powerful, Amy.
So often, I think that we solve the wrong problem and we just keep trying to solve it, looking for a solution when we're not even asking the right question to begin with. So, for example, a couple might come into my therapy office and say, like, how do we stop fighting so much? And they're expecting me to teach them some communication skills or that we would just go over conflict resolution. But sometimes that's not the right question. The question might be like, let's start with, why are you fighting so much? And maybe there's something else going on, right? The fighting might just be a symptom and it's not the actual problem. Maybe you have some built up resentment from something that happened a few years ago. And we need to address that, not just why you argue when the dishes aren't done. And we do this in business too, where somebody might say, I've been trying to figure out, like, how do I get more customers? And they've been trying to attract new customers, but maybe that's not the best question. Maybe the best question is, how do I make my existing customers more loyal? Or how do I get my existing customers to spend more money while they're there instead of attracting new people? But if we don't ever step back and question, like, why am I trying to do this? Or what could I do differently? Then I think so often all of our time and energy goes into solving the wrong problem.
How do you coach others to get to learn how to do root cause analysis when there's so much emotion? Right? So if you're really good at root cause analysis, you're asking why, and then you're questioning that answer until you get to a point of frustration. But when there's so much emotion engaged in those questions and justification of personal behaviors, like, what is your tip or strategy for that? Because that was a note I wrote in here in the book, was like, oh, when I get to talk to Amy, I want to find out what happens when somebody's like, well, why? Because he's a jackass.
Right.
And it's like, well, actually. So what are your tips and tricks for that?
So sometimes I think it's just about stepping back and asking yourself that, like, could this issue I'm addressing, could that possibly just be a side effect of something else? Could it actually just be a surface level issue? Might there be something deeper? And at least write some things down. I love to write things down because it gets it out of our head and onto a piece of paper. And just ask yourself some other questions, like might be some other things that I want to tackle. So, for example, if it's a communication issue, well, why? Why might we be having a communication issue? What part might I be playing? Is there something from the past that might be stirring this up? Is there another way to look at it? And if we can just zoom out a bit, because so often we end up being in the thick of it and we think this is the only way is to answer this one question, or if I address this one issue, when really, maybe there's some other factors influencing it. So if you can write something down, if you're a visual person, you draw it out, and you think, well, like, what other factors are involved in this? What might be behind it? What would it mean if I solve this? What would I expect to happen? In the therapy office, we'll often do a variety of those things with just asking people, like, well, what would that mean? If we solved your communication issues, then what would life be like? Well, we'd be happy. Okay, well, what else would happen? Well, we might still argue about X, Y, or Z. Oh, okay, well, then why might you argue about that still? So I'm a big fan of saying, let's ask, like, what would that mean? What would that mean if I solved this? What would that mean if I had more customers? What would it mean if I didn't have more customers? And when we start to just reflect a little bit more on those sorts of things, sometimes we can then get to the root cause of something.
I love the identification of the end state, right?
Yeah.
So what is your desired state? What would that mean? Because that's difficult. It's easy to cast blame.
Absolutely.
And not look within. One of the favorite questions that I learned a long time ago was to ask, what do I need to do differently in order for us to, whatever it is, giving permission for your partner or colleague to be able to say, like, stop interrupting or give me time to think. What's your tip or trick on that?
Yeah, I like that a lot, is to just say, yeah, what could I do differently? And because a lot of times in relationships, we think, I need to point out what you did wrong and how it caused me to feel. But research will show as soon as I take a little bit of accountability, even if I think that my husband's behavior is out of line, if I take the accountability and say, boy, I'm sorry that I overreacted when I saw that, he's much more likely to take responsibility for his part. And then we can have a much more productive dialogue and we aren't pointing fingers. So I think anytime we can accept accountability in terms of, gosh, I ignored this problem longer than I should have, or I spoke up, or maybe I didn't address it in the right way. Go to a colleague and you say, I wasn't sure what to do, and I don't think I handled it as good as I could have. That opens up the door right there to then have a really open and frank conversation about what happened and how things might get better in the future.
Yeah, my wife and I took something from recess when we were kids, when we would find ourselves spinning into a point of like we're just unreasonably upset about something. One of us calls it do-over.
I like it.
Like just a hard reset. And then we both kind of admit, like, really, this had nothing to do with you. I was mad about the dishwasher, or you not putting your laundry away because I'm actually worried or scared about something going on tomorrow. Or I was carrying a lot when I walked in the house and I snapped at you and I shouldn't have done that. And that I don't know where we picked that up. I mean, we've been doing that since we were 22 years old. And it works because if you're not stubborn, like you said, if you question your question, it's good to get that narrative out of your brain and move forward.
Oh, I love the idea of a do-over, because how often do we end up like angry or we end up fighting about something and you don't even really know why you're upset or where it started and you think that we're continuing down the wrong path further and further the longer we go.
Yeah,
So I
well,
like
that's what
that
happens
reset.
at recess, right? You're playing Foursquare and somebody's upset about something else because 3 plays before somebody did something, and now you're fighting over the rules, and anybody can call a do-over. And I just think that's powerful organizationally. So
Yeah.
with that, tell me of your 50, great plays in the playbook, are there a couple that stand out to you personally that, as you put it, because I was wondering, 1 through 50, did she make 50 her favorite? Is number 1 her favorite? Is number 4 her favorite? Like an artist on their record, they put the 4th song as their favorite. What are your go-tos or favorites in the book?
So I like to brainstorm the bad ideas first. And I think that comes from a couple things. For one, whenever I feel stuck, just brainstorm what doesn't work. And then I have the list for what does. And even if I'm doing something with a group of people, I like this idea. And I think it probably comes from childhood where I was afraid to speak up in class because I didn't want to have a bad idea. So for anybody who struggles with that too, like, oh, I don't want to embarrass myself or I don't want to throw this creative idea out, I think it works well is to say, well, let's just brainstorm what doesn't work. Get it all on the table, the bad ideas. And then suddenly it's not so scary anymore. If I make this far-fetched idea that sounds horrible and everybody else offers another far-fetched idea, great. And but for me, it's worked in a lot of situations. And in the therapy office, I would use it when people would say, I'm depressed. I've tried everything. Nothing works. Nothing's going to help me. I'd say, well, let's brainstorm what would make your depression worse. And somebody might say, well, when I stay in bed 23 hours out of the day, my depression gets worse. When I don't eat for 2 days, it gets even worse. So we make this list. And by the time we're done, well, now we have some solutions. If you stay in bed 23 hours, then your depression gets worse. So what if you got out of bed? And if you don't eat for 2 days, it gets worse. Well, what if you tried to eat even just a small meal? And suddenly we have a list of what could potentially work. And the example I give in the book too is when I was widowed and I needed some extra money. I didn't know what to do. So one of the things I came up with was creating an online dropship jewelry business. I knew nothing about jewelry. I knew nothing about starting a website, but I knew what wouldn't work. So I brainstormed all the bad ideas of like, if I create a website to try to sell jewelry, what would make people not buy from me? Like, oh, if you have a horrible website, if your descriptions are terrible, if the pictures are awful. Okay, well, now I know what to do. Let's try to make sure the descriptions are good. Let's make the pictures clear. So anytime in life to this day, if I'm really struggling with, gosh, I don't know what's going to work, or I have no idea what path forward to take, I'll just brainstorm the bad ideas. And often from that, the good ideas become much more evident.
When you think of like an organization, say like a middle school staff, why do you think there are so many people who will embrace the bad idea and then justify, well, there's really nothing we can do about it? that learned helplessness. Because as you just said that, like, well, if you lay in bed for 23 hours and you don't eat for 2 days and you stare at your phone, it's going to make it worse. Why do you think there are so many people who in organizations just get stuck in that state that they're in as a team and refuse to step away from it?
I think it's sometimes because people have tried something and it didn't work. So then they just throw up their hands and say, well, nothing works,
Risk.
right? Maybe I spoke up once before and somebody said that's not an option, or I asked for something I needed. And maybe it's even in my personal life. I said to my friend, hey, can you help with this? And they said no. So from that, I learned it's bad to ask for what I need. It's bad to speak up. It's bad to offer ideas. And then we get stuck in that mode, right?
Right.
And the path of least resistance. So I'll just go with it. And we end up more like Eeyore, who says, as long as I just keep going, there's nothing I can do about it, then we don't have to take responsibility. You don't have to create change. And it feels easier in the moment, but obviously makes our life more difficult in the long term.
I had someone one time tell me that I needed to turn down my Tigger and turn up my Eeyore. And I was like, that's never going to happen. Ever.
Funny. Right.
Because I think you need to turn down your Eeyore. I like that coaching point. Like let's turn down that self-destructive, it's never gonna be okay. Like
Right.
it's gonna be whatever you make it. And that, again, that's why the playbook is so powerful. And I want to go back to brainstorm the bad idea first. In continuous improvement and change management, that's called farming for dissent, right? Like what are all the things that are going to stop us? What's another tip you have for like plowing through those narratives that you create to hinder yourself? How else do you help people through that?
And so, and I think brainstorming the bad ideas and questioning your question can sometimes go hand in hand, right? When we think,
Yeah.
well, if I do this, then things will be horrible and awful. Well, would they? Or how could I do it slightly different? And there's so many different like creative ways to come up with a solution to something. And yet, again, our brain gets stuck in the same problem solving mode where we think, well, if this is how I solved it yesterday, this is how I'll solve it today. And a lot of times with kids in my therapy office, I'll teach them problem solving skills. We know the better your problem solving skills, the better your mental health. Yet a lot of times we don't really stop and think about how do I solve problems. But I'll put an object on one side of the room and tell a kid, like, it has to be moved to the other side of the room and you can't use your hands. What are you going to do? And often their first reaction is, well, there's nothing I can do. And then
Right,
we'll come
Eeyore.
up with some solutions, right? Like I'll use my elbows, I'll, use something else and I'll scrape it onto a notebook, or we come up with all of these ideas. And by the time we're done, we're like, look, you just came up with 20 different ways. All 20 might not work, but some of them will, but you don't know until you try. And I think sometimes as adults, we need that reminder too, that there's so many different ways to solve a problem, but our brain will just always take that path of least resistance unless we decide we're going to do something slightly different. And in the book too, one of my other favorite places, I say, talk to the rubber duck, which is basically you just have an inanimate object like a rubber duck and you talk to it out loud. And we know that when you suddenly are like, okay, I have this issue, here's what it is. Once you hear yourself talking about it out loud, often the answers become much clearer as you're explaining it to your rubber duck or whatever object you have of, here's the story, here's what's not working, I've already tried this. The more you talk about it out loud, the more your brain hears it in a slightly different way, the more you're likely to think, oh, but I haven't tried X, Y, or Z. Or what if I did this just slightly differently? Or am I exaggerating over here when I say I've tried everything? Suddenly you start to hear things a little bit differently, and that can ignite some different problem solving skills too.
Again, and that was a really good play when I read that. I wrote a note, I just turned to the page about the rubber duck. I was like, is that what all those people who drive Jeeps are doing all the time?
I know, right?
They have a lot of issues apparently. So tell me, I mean, the self-talk, those different pieces, this is really, and I just want to do a little TED tangent here for a second. This is why therapy in the 21st century is so powerful, because, I just imagine, and I don't think you would do it, but I just imagine sometimes you'd want to physically grab people by the lapel and be like, come on. And when you say like, try this, let's do this, no one naturally comes to this stuff. And you so eloquently put this in here. I wanted to ask you, who's your ride or die? Who's your therapist? Who do you go to for mental clarity, to get your narratives out, to shake you out of when you start to cycle, if you need to, or if you have to?
Yeah, I think all of us get stuck in our own heads, and I'm no exception sometimes. Luckily, my current husband, my first husband passed away, but I'm remarried. I'm married to somebody who is incredible at like flipping the script. When I'm like, oh, listen to this, or what happened? He's really good at saying, and the alternative to that story is like, let's say I get rejected for something, and he'll say, well, that was really good that you found out now that it wasn't a good fit. I'm like, oh, you're right. Like, they aren't a good fit for me. And I guess getting rejected is probably an okay thing rather than further down the road or figuring it out. And so, yeah, he's really good sometimes at just reframing the things that I come up with and helping me see things from a different perspective. We know that as our emotion goes up, our logic goes down. So when I'm like really revved up about something or I'm anxious about something, I don't see things clearly. He can be the voice of reason sometimes that points it out in a different way.
That should be a T-shirt. We should sell Amy Morin T-shirts that say, "As emotion goes up, our logic goes down," because that statement in and of itself, I think, describes everything we're experiencing in the last 4 or 5 years, in so many different ways. That so many people are struggling with just mental perseverance because their emotions just keep going up and the logic goes down, and they just get so frustrated so fast, and then turn to social media platforms to put out things that are unknowing to them, unnerving others to a point where they're just not healthy.
Right.
What's your advice for people who get stuck into that doom loop?
I think just recognizing your emotions and realizing when they are going up, when they're going down, and what do we reach for? Obviously, a lot of us reach for our phones. You're at the grocery store, you're in line, you're bored for a minute. What do? Right? We look for something in that moment. So reminding yourself like it's okay to have feelings, it's okay to be uncomfortable. And there's a play in the book about name it to tame it. We know that just putting a label to an emotion moves it from the emotional processing part of your brain to more of the logical part. So when I say, okay, I feel anxious right now, my anxiety automatically goes down just a little bit. Or when I say, I'm frustrated, I feel a little bit less frustrated just by naming it. So I think when we get better at that, about recognizing it, about looking at what's my go-to, what's the first thing I reach for when I feel uncomfortable, and we all have these things, whether somebody says I turn on Netflix or I reach for a glass of wine or I reach for my phone, all of these things that kind of numb us, yet at the same time don't give us an opportunity to work through the emotion. Instead, it just reinforces to us that feeling uncomfortable is bad and I must do something quickly so that I don't feel this emotion. Even though it's good for us, our emotions are really helpful. Even the uncomfortable ones serve a purpose.
Yeah, like my phrase is, when I start to feel myself selling my mental real estate, I try to reclaim it as fast as possible.
I like that.
Like, I don't know why I'm giving you this. Okay, so that brings me to throw a good vibes boomerang. Tell me about this one, because here I want to read. You wrote, throwing a good vibes boomerang also has physical effects on your body. Acts of kindness release oxytocin. Sorry for that. The love hormone. Not only will that create a sense of bonding and happiness, but you'll also reduce cortisol, the stress hormone. So let's get into this, because it's end of school year. When this podcast goes up, people who will be listening will be, they'll be counting either up or down their days, and it's been a stressful year. And anybody else who's listening goes through these pieces. But what's a throw a good vibes boomerang?
So often when we're a little stressed out, when we're anxious, when we're having a bad day, we just think, oh, I need to take care of myself. I'm going to work through this. I don't have anything to give today. I need to focus on myself. But the research shows that that version of self-care actually isn't that helpful. You have to get out of your own head sometimes and prove to yourself that you have something to give to the world. And if you do just one small act of kindness for somebody else, it comes back to you tenfold. And I don't mean by terms of karma, that if I do 3 good things, then 3 great things are going to be gifted to me from the universe. But I mean, we experience a huge benefit just by doing something nice for somebody else. If I say, gosh, I'm so grateful to my friend, and I send them a text message that just reminds them, automatically my mood gets lifted just because I showed them some kindness. And there's always things we can do. It doesn't have to be like a huge act of generosity or a gift or anything major, but sometimes just sending a genuine compliment to somebody, sending an email to a coworker where you say, I really appreciate the effort and hard work you put into these projects. Thank you. Those things can really turn our day around in ways that you might not even expect, but we tend to do the opposite. Our natural reaction when we're in a rough space is to say, I'm just going to focus on me. I got to get through the day. I don't have any extra stuff to give to anybody else. I can't focus on that right now. And then we start to become a bit selfish in terms of just focusing on ourselves, when the real remedy is to say, get out of your head a little bit and do something nice for someone else and just see what happens.
One of my favorite U2 songs has a line in it that the refrain is "Get out of your own way." And when I read through a Good Vibes Boomerang, one of the things that I think is really powerful is gratitude.
Yeah.
And to your point, talk to me about how demonstrating gratitude is a Good Vibes Boomerang.
Yeah. So if I say to somebody else, again, I appreciate you, not only do I improve my mood, but I'm probably going to improve theirs. Nobody gets an email that says I appreciate you and feels worse
Right?
about getting the message. But I think it's just one of the simplest and easiest ways to turn our day around. And when I'm stuck in my own head and I'm thinking about everything that went wrong, my brain will continue down that path. I can easily interrupt it by saying, like, what's one kind thing I could do? Or what are some positive things I could think about? So another play in the book is the 2-minute gratitude flash. You set the timer for 2 minutes and just write down all the positive things you can for 2 minutes. Instead of just saying, oh, I'm grateful for the air I have to breathe and the water to drink, where sometimes it doesn't really drum up real gratitude, but sometimes just trying to create a list. Like, what do I have that's good in life? Just balances out the negativity that we experience on a bad day.
And that's why one of the things I think is powerful about your text in when we close out here in a bit, I want to talk about, but you have so many things that are applicable for everyone that, if I were a classroom teacher still and I saw like the culture stressing out because we're coming to, say, AP testing here or ACT or end of semester, I would start flipping through here to try to figure out, like, as a teacher in front of my students, we're going to do this tomorrow. What would you advise them to do in a stressful season to support their class cultures?
Oh, that's a good question. Because, and I think the 2-minute gratitude flash would be an easy one you could do as a classroom activity. You set the timer, give everybody 2 minutes, and then give them the opportunity to share those things if they want. And just hearing somebody else say, gosh, I'm going to my grandmother's house on Saturday and I'm grateful for that. That can be a really easy way to say, oh, well, I'm happy for you that you're going to your grandmother's house. I think anything we can do too to create the mood, right? It's AP test time. Nobody's like, woohoo, I'm so excited about these exams. But we have the opportunity to set a huge tone when we walk into any room we go into. If there's some collective dread in the room, and I just kind of like go along with it, well, then I'm reinforcing the dread. But if I walk in with a positive attitude and share a little bit of positivity, I can help other people feel better. And then people start to feed off of each other and the whole mood changes. So I think in staff meetings and conferences that we go to, there's a huge opportunity to say, I can create a lot of the mood just by how I walk into the room and how I interact with people.
I think that's going to take us to the last one of your plays here that I want to talk about, which is hum, sing, chant, or gargle. I and all of the Smart Thinking podcast listeners know I have a problem with music. Like it defines me. I love music, and when I saw hum, sing, chant, or gargle, the objective being stimulate your vagus nerve to lower anxiety and calm your nervous system. Tell me about this one.
Yeah, so it can be just a really easy way when your anxiety's through the roof, when you're stressed out, and you're walking down the hallway and thinking, oh, I don't want to be here, don't want to have to do this meeting, this next thing is going to be awful. If you just hummed to yourself, it calms your body. And what happens when our body starts to calm is our brain gets the message of like, oh, I guess we're safe. If we're humming, we're not facing an angry lion. We must be walking into a situation that really isn't that bad. And same thing for singing. You're in the car, you're able to sing to yourself for a few minutes, just has a big impact on your physiology. It tells your brain, no, we're calm. Go in the restroom and you gargle for just a minute in between a couple of other things you're doing. Again, sends the message to your body, oh, we're calm right now. So I've worked with people who said, in between meetings now I hum in the hallway, or when I'm driving from one meeting to the next, I sing really loud in the car. Makes a big difference to my stress level for the day. Little things can make a big difference like that.
I had worked with a man when I was in college. I was working at construction sites. I was a painter and a carpenter. And there was a gentleman who always whistled. And it used to drive us crazy. We're like, what the hell? It's just annoying. But he had a depth of whistling songs that were impressive. And then one day, one of the other guys sitting around, we were having lunch, and we were like, yeah, I just really wish Jim would stop whistling. It's so annoying. And somebody turned and said, have you ever seen him mad? And then one of the older guys said, no one angry whistles.
Interesting.
And when I read your chapter, I was like, yeah, how many people have you seen rage whistle?
Right.
It doesn't, or rage humming, right? I mean, I suppose if you're doing like Cry of the Valkyrie and you're walking into a room and you're like, but nobody does that, Amy. And your entire playbook is filled with so many applicable strategies that I hope when others read it like I did, every time I would finish one of the plays, I would stop and think of all of my life experiences that proved you right. Because there's nothing wrong in here. It's so awesome.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I think you're right. We can all come up with examples like that, like, oh, yeah, people aren't angry when they whistle. But we just don't think about it. And then to know, okay, well, now I feel like I have some tools. Because again, when our emotions are high, our logic is low. So when we're struck with something and we're faced with a challenge, it's hard to know what to do. But when we have a playbook, now you're just like, okay, just pause, pick, run the right play, and let's see what happens.
All right, Amy, so rapid questions as we close out here. The first one is, one of the things that I believe is that music moves people. And I believe in what are called 180 moments. So you've been in the car, you've been for a walk, and a song comes on, and it changes your entire mood. It turns you in a different direction. And we always collect these. And at our house, we actually have a 180 family playlist. So like A Sky Full of Stars by Coldplay is our family anthem, right? But then there are all these other songs on there. If a song came on and you were turning up your inner Eeyore, what song would come on that would change the direction of your day in a positive way?
Probably Meet Virginia by Train.
Oh, that's a great song.
I love that one.
That's also like grad school time for you, right? A little after grad school?
Yeah, that was probably that time frame. Yep.
You had that CD just playing over and over and over again?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think we were in grad school about the same time, because I had, mine was Ben Folds 5. Like I just listened to this over and over. I didn't even hear it. I just needed it on.
Yep.
If your friends were to describe you in one word for their impact on the world in which you've created around them, what would that word be?
Maybe fun.
I could see that. Yeah. and fun, Amy. Is that margarita or daiquiri induced in any way in the Keys?
Not at all. Would be more coffee induced, but
Ooh,
no
caffeine. Yeah, just more of Amy.
Right.
And describe for me and the listeners, what's a good day for Amy?
Oh, a good day is probably one where I just get to enjoy time with friends and family, and don't have anything in particular on the agenda, no strict schedule or anything, but just an opportunity to connect with people.
So like a true Jimmy Buffett Keys moment.
Correct. Yep.
And my last question for us is, through all the books you've written, through all the ways you've impacted others, what is your greatest life lesson? What's the wisdom that you have garnered in all of this research and impact on other people?
Oh, I would say that you don't have to feel strong to be strong. You can it's all about the little choices you make every single day. You don't just wake up saying, I'm mentally strong, I'm going to get through this. It's just about knowing, what am I going to do next? And knowing that it's about the little steps that we take.
I love that. Amy, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And listeners, again, the book is called The Mental Strength Playbook. It's one of many books. You should read the entire series of 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Parenting book, kids book, book for women. And that's actually how I found you. I was in my office at work, and I saw the book 13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do, and a group of my colleagues were talking about them each, and I was like, give me that book. And I read that, and then I went back into your entire playlist, and I love everything you do. I love the way that you write. I love the way that you think. I love how you broke down the text, and I just love the fact that hopefully this book will get into schools and classrooms around the country and the world, and people will use these strategies to better the life of young people and each other. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
So let's do some smart thinking. List the different strategies that you can apply to support yourself and others. Describe who in your life needs this playbook. And last, list the different ways in which you will change your approach to just supporting your own mental strengths. That's it. That's the Smart Thinking Podcast. Hey, as always, thank you so much for listening. And please make sure to share this episode with others, as well as rate this episode on whatever platform you listen to. Please do me a favor and rate it when you get a chance, because we really appreciate that feedback, as well as the opportunity to promote this podcast, to promote leadership amongst others. Okay. As we close out here, I also want to thank the Well Pennies for their great music, and I'm going to end today with one of my favorite songs from Golden Bear Studios. But as we close out, I really want you to reflect upon the different ways in which you will be investing in yourself as we head into the summer season here in North America, as well as find ways to support those that you serve. You see, finding a book like Amy's The Mental Strength Playbook really positions you to have an index, a reference source, a strategy book that you can just go to at any moment and open up and say, I'm struggling with this, or they are struggling with that, and here is exactly what I can do to support and help them. You can find Amy on her website and find different ways in which to learn and grow from her. But at the end of the day, it's about personal investment and taking the time for you to build up your own toolkit so that you position yourself to be able to call the play for whoever needs it in the moment that they are about to take on their life's greatest challenge.
You stir my heart when you walk out your car. We talked there for hours. I heard you laugh, gave me a heart attack, yeah. Like some superpower. If you're my hero, I need saving. Your smile is what I'm craving. What a beautiful miracle it is. Figure it out. I needed someone to help lift me off the ground. Heroes exist, baby, a gift of light brings me close to the light. Why didn't I see it before? It take me back to when we were singing songs under the stars. Not a worry in our minds, flowing in and out of time. At the speed of light, you ran straight into my life. You can control every thought in my mind. Figuring out I needed someone to help lift me off the ground, yeah. Heroes exist, maybe a gift of light brings me close to the light. Why didn't I see it before? Wanna get a bit closer to you. Wanna feel your power, yeah. I figured out You were that someone to help lift me off the ground, yeah. Heroes exist, baby, a gift of light brings me close to the light. Why didn't I see it before? Wanna get a bit closer. Take me up into the sky, being alive. Take my heart with you.
How do people get a hold of you?
So my website is amymorinlcsw.com, and that's the best way to find my podcast, my books, my TEDx talk, and my emails on there too.